Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Olivet Discourse in our continuing study of the life of Christ. Matthew chapter 24 begins, Jesus came out from the temple. He had been confronting the religious leaders, and they had been questioning his authority. Jesus came out from the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. And he said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be torn down." We look here at a model of what the temple looked like in his day. It looks very different today of the structure that you see, the temple and the surrounding columns. None of that remains. It has been obliterated so much that archaeologists argue about exactly where the temple was located. You look across here to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus is going to leave the temple now and go down across the Kidron Valley up to the top of the Mount of Olives, where you have a panoramic view of Jerusalem, and from there he's going to give this discourse. As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" They're probably thinking this is all one answer, and it sort of is. He's going to answer it that way, but let's see how that plays out. Matthew chapter 24, verse 4, "And Jesus answered and said to them, See to it that no one misleads you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, I am the Messiah, and many are going to be misled." Verse 6, "You will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not frightened, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end." They're asking him, when is the end? And he's saying, well, here's some things that are come, but that's not the end. He hasn't answered their question yet. "For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And in various places there will be famines and earthquakes, and all those things will take place." But those things are merely the beginning of birth pangs. You know, when a woman is about to go into labor, the baby hasn't come yet, but you have the beginnings of some movement and some beginnings of pains, and that's announcing that it's going to come, but not quite yet. "Then they will deliver you to tribulation, and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. At that time many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another." So he looks at upheaval not merely in the world, but even among those that had thought to be God's people, Israel, and what we know as the church. "Many false prophets will arise and will mislead many. Because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come." And so what we're going to see is the gospel goes out, and it is preached throughout the world. By the way, that takes place in the book of Acts. Throughout the book of Acts, we see the gospel being preached, to what they considered the uttermost ends of the earth. It's still happening even today, but then the end will come. Notice the phrase, "the end will come." That's what their question had been about, and now he turns to that, but not perhaps the way you think he might. "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place." Now, the holy place was in the temple just across the valley. They were actually where they could see the temple, and they knew inside was the holy place. And Matthew adds the words, I don't think Jesus said these words, Matthew adds the words, "Let the reader understand." Because, as Jesus was saying, it was the hearers that were hearing it. But Matthew's saying, this is a little tough to understand. I'm throwing you a loop here. I'm throwing you something you didn't expect to see. When you see the abomination of desolation, and those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. But when you said that phrase, abomination of desolation, that's a phrase borrowed from the Old Testament. It's pointing to something that had first been prophesied in the Old Testament. Way back in Daniel chapter 11, there was a prophecy about a king that would arise. Now, this prophecy was fulfilled in the person of one Antiochus Epiphanes. He was a Greek king, although he wasn't in Greece. He was in Mesopotamia and what we call modern-day Turkey. But he had come down against the Jews. And a whole series of circumstances had taken place, and these are all prophesied in Daniel chapter 11, verse 30. And in the midst of that, it talks about how ships of Kittim, that's a buzzword for Rome, for ships of Kittim will come against him, and therefore he will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. Now, can't go into all the background, but these things actually had taken place way back in 168 BC, 168 years before Christ. The passage goes on to say, forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice. And they will set up the abomination of desolation that had happened just the way Daniel said that it would happen when this pagan king, Antiochus Epiphanes, he came into the temple, and he said, you guys aren't going to worship Yahweh anymore. You're going to worship the way I want you to worship. You're going to worship Zeus. He put up a statue of Zeus in the temple in Jerusalem and insisted that the Jews worship that. And that stayed there for about 3.5 years until finally the Jews revolted and they cleansed the temple. In fact, they still celebrate that cleansing of the temple today with a feast every year at Hanukkah. That's what that commemorates. But here was a prophecy, and here's Jesus using the language of that prophecy, but he's not describing something that had taken place 168 years earlier. Rather, he's saying he's predicting something that's going to take place in his future that would again take place. So what Jesus is essentially saying, it's going to happen again. Again, there's going to be a pagan king. Again, there's going to be the regular sacrifice abolished. Again, there's going to be an abomination that renders the temple desolate for worship. Indeed, it did take place in the year 70 AD, a mere 40 years after Jesus says these words. The Roman general Titus, his father at this time was becoming emperor, and had just become emperor, but the Roman general Titus comes up against Jerusalem in January of 70 AD. He besieges the city for about 6 months, and then finally in August he breaks through the defenses of the city, captures the temple, burns it to the ground, and builds an altar to the pagan deities that were worshipped by the Romans, an abomination that renders it desolate. Indeed, and now I'm not saying this part is the fulfillment of the prophecy, but if you go there today, if you go to Jerusalem today, and you go there to the Temple Mount, and I've had the opportunity to do that, you will find there a structure that even today renders it desolate for worship. Can I be so bold as to call that, at least in Jewish terms, an abomination of desolation? It's called the Dome of the Rock. Well, the prophecy continues. Jesus says, when you see that happen, whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get his things that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. Because you're going to have to get out of town. You're going to have to do it in a hurry. But pray that your flight will not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Now, when we take these words prophesied by Jesus, and then we put them up alongside the historical narrative of an eyewitness account who was there in 70 AD to see the entire event. Speaking of Josephus, he was a Jewish historian. Actually, it started out as a general who'd been captured by the Romans, but he was allowed to be an eyewitness and then later on to write about it. He talked about how Jerusalem had been surrounded and the entire nation was now shut up by fate as in a prison, and the Roman army encompassed the city when it was crowded with inhabitants. Accordingly, the multitude of those that therein perished exceeded all the destructions that either men or God ever brought upon the world. It's almost as if he is quoting the words of Jesus. Now, I don't think he'd ever read the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. But it's almost as though he's quoting Jesus. He describes it in such similar circumstances. Jesus goes on to say, "Then if anyone says to you, 'Behold, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is.'" By the way, there's a false teaching going around that says Jesus returned back around 70 AD. Don't believe it. For false Christs and false messiahs, false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders, so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I've told you in advance. So if they say to you, "Behold, here he is in the wilderness," don't go out. Or, "Behold, he's in the inner rooms," don't believe them. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. When he comes, you're not going to mistake it for anything else. Remember, I had the opportunity to be on Hollywood Beach back in the 1976 when they were doing the bicentennial celebration, and it was a really big deal. They had all these fireworks in our city, and they were glorious, and I got to sort of have a ringside seat because I was right there. I was living on the beach, and remember holding my little daughter at the time, watching the fireworks. And then after it was all over, the fireworks ended and everybody went home, this thunderstorm moved in. And the fireworks had been magnificent, but this thunderstorm was like nothing I'd ever seen before, where there was streak lightning, and it went from one horizon all the way to the other. It was as if the Lord was saying, you think your fireworks were neat, look what I can do. And there was this streak lightning that literally went from horizon to horizon, this magnificent display. And Jesus says, that is what my coming is going to be like. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. You're not going to miss it. But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory, and he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. This is, Jesus is telling his second coming. He had already come the first time. He was already there. But now he's going to come. He says, I'm going to come again. And they will see the Son of Man, and he'll be coming with power and great glory, and he'll send forth his angels, and there'll be a trumpet, and there'll be a gathering together of his chosen people, his elect. Now, notice it describes the Son of Man coming. When we speak about the coming of the Son of Man, there has in recent times been a bit of confusion. He's coming on the clouds. He's coming with a great trumpet. He's coming to gather together his elect. Those, I want to sort of underscore those, because we're going to look at another passage and see where those exact same phrasing is used. There's a view that came about in the 1800s, and it was espoused by a preacher by the name of John Nelson Darby, and the view says, it's called dispensationalism, and it contains a number of things, but with respect to the passage we're looking at here, this view says that Jesus is going to come not once, but he will come twice. That there are two future comings of Jesus. And the way this is usually described these days, I'm not sure if Darby wanted to use these terms or not, but it was a little ponderous to talk about the second coming of Jesus, and then the coming after the second coming of Jesus, or the second coming of Jesus, or the coming just before the second coming that's not the coming that's already taken place. That became a little difficult. So the word was invented, the word was coined, and there's nothing wrong with coining the word, but the word was coined the rapture versus the second coming. And usually what is taught by those who espouse this view of dispensationalism is that there's 7 years between the two. That first Jesus is going to come for his church in the rapture, and that's sort of a secret coming where he gathers all his church together. And then he comes again 7 years later in his second coming, and the passage we just read is usually used to refer only to that coming where Jesus comes with his church. So dispensationalists teach there's two future comings of Jesus. Now, only dispensationalists teach this. Nobody else comes up with this. It's part of their doctrinal stance. And like I said, this was invented, or they would say seen and understood, but nobody held it before John Darby back in the 1830s. And so it's a relatively recent view, less than 200 years it's been around. First the rapture, then the second coming. One of the passages that is typically used to describe the rapture is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 14 through 16, where Paul says, "For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him," remember, well, wait a second, comes for his church, but notice God also brings with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. So the teaching is that in the rapture, he brings with him those who have already died. So he's bringing folk with him, but also he comes to gather his church. Notice he will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. "For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will not precede those who have fallen asleep." In context, Paul is talking about what about people that have already died? Did they miss the second coming? Did they miss the coming of the Lord? And Paul says, no, they haven't missed it, because he will bring those with him. But then verse 16, "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first, and then we who are alive and remain will be caught up to meet him in clouds." Now, Matthew 24 is taught by the dispensationalists to be the second coming, whereas 1 Thessalonians 4 is taught by the dispensationalists to be an earlier event, a different event that takes place 7 years earlier. However, when we put the two passages side by side, and remember, there's nothing in the Bible that ever says there's two different events. That's something that's guessed at. I think it's imposed on the passage. We look at Matthew 24. It talks about the Son of Man coming. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, it talks about the Lord himself will descend. Well, that means he's coming. You don't descend unless you're coming. And when he comes, he is coming. In Matthew 24, he's coming on the clouds. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, he's coming, and those who remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds. So in both passages, we have references to him coming and meeting and in the clouds. In Matthew chapter 24, we have how he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, you have the trumpet of God sounding. In Matthew chapter 24, they will gather together his elect, his chosen people. His people are gathered in Matthew 24. And in 1 Thessalonians 4, they are caught up. Now, it doesn't use the word gathered, it's caught, but they're still gathered. When you catch something up, you're gathering it. When you gather it, you're catching it up, especially if he's in the sky. So what I have is two different passages describing the coming of the Lord using the very same terms. And there's never any hint that I am supposed to understand this as two different events. Indeed, this is why the church, for the first 1800 years of the church uniformly saw these two passages as referring to the same thing. And I think appropriately so. Now Matthew 24:32 goes on to say, "Now learn the parable from the fig tree." And Jesus had already used the fig tree as sort of a living parable, a living picture of Israel. The fig tree, remember, had been cursed, and that had been a sign of what would happen to national Israel because of their unbelief. Well, here's the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So you too, when you see all these things, when you see these signs taking place, recognize that he is near, right at the door. That the coming of all these things are going to take place. Indeed, verse 34, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." All these things about tribulation and these things about wars and rumors of wars, this would all take place in the first century, leading up to that, can I even say it, that great tribulation in which Jerusalem would have its fall. Now, the one thing that did not take place in that first century, except maybe in sort of a typological way, but one thing that did not actually take place was the second coming of Jesus. There's actually a teaching today called preterism that says that Jesus did come back, but just spiritually, and that was the only second coming that's going to take place. Well, no, that's not true, because Jesus said when he does come back, it's going to be like the lightning. You'll see it from one end to the other. Nobody's going to miss it. If somebody says, here's Messiah, don't believe that. When it comes back, everyone will see. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Every once in a while somebody comes along who says, I've figured it out. I've figured out when Jesus is coming, and they sell a bunch of books, and gullible people buy them, and they're always wrong. And Jesus says, of course they're wrong. Nobody knows. Even the angels don't know. Even the Son. He says, I don't even know. But the Father knows. And that's enough. For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, and giving in marriage. Now, those weren't bad things. They were just doing stuff of life. But they were doing it until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. And the coming of the Son of Man is going to be like it. Life is going to go on, one day after another, and there's going to be all the normal things in life until one day he comes, and that will be the end. Then there will be two men in the field. One will be taken, and one will be left. Remember, he talked about gathering together his elect in a few verses earlier. Now he's getting more specific. Two people will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken, one will be left. Therefore, because it's going to come so unexpectedly, therefore be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would have not allowed his house to be broken into. You know, when a thief comes, he doesn't call you up and say, hey, I'm breaking into your house at 3 in the morning. Can you leave milk and cookies out for me? No, he comes unexpectedly. And Jesus is going to come unexpectedly. Verse 44, for this reason, you also must be ready. That means we should always be ready for his coming. Now, how can we be ready for his coming? He's going to go into that in a little bit. But let me just say for right now, by being faithful. For this reason, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will. Who then is the faithful and sensible slave, whom his master put in charge of his household to give them their food at the proper time? You know, servants, slaves could be given certain responsibilities. And even if the master is not there, the servant or the slave is supposed to do that which he's supposed to do. Verse 46, blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes, doing the right thing. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that evil slave says in his heart, my master's not coming for a long time, maybe he thinks he's figured it out, and begins to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, at an hour which he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. There is a warning here to be faithful, to be looking for the coming of the Lord, and not to assume it's some other time, because you just don't know. So we have really three parables. We've just looked at the first one. This is the parable of the faithful and the unfaithful slaves. The faithful slave is doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's faithful until the Lord's coming. The unfaithful slave, he's partying. He says, well, the Lord's not coming for a long time, or at least anytime soon, so I can just have fun. The second parable in Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 13, tells the story of some wise and foolish virgins who were waiting not for a master, but they are waiting for the bride and bridegroom to come back. Traditionally what would happen is there'd be a party, and then at an appointed time the bridegroom would go get his bride and then come back, and then they'd celebrate the marriage feast. And again, the the idea here is be on the alert for the coming of the groom, for the coming of the Lord. And again, the warning is given in Matthew 25:13, be on the alert, for you do not know the day or the hour. And then the third parable is given in Matthew chapter 25, beginning in verse 14. This is the parable of the talents. It's likened to a man who's going to go out on a journey. He calls his own slaves and trusts his possessions to them, and he gives 5 talents to one, and he gives other talents to others. And the one who gets the 5 talents goes out and invests it, and he gets 5 more talents. And the one who gets the 2 talents, he goes and he gets several more talents. And then the one who gets 1 talent, he goes and buries it. Now, we've seen this parable before, so I'm not going to go into a great deal of depth. But he comes back, the master comes back, and those who have invested their talents wisely, doesn't matter if they got 5 or 2, but they've used what they received, they are praised and they are rewarded. But the one who doesn't do anything with that which he was given, he merely takes it and buries it, he is punished. And that is which he has is taken away from him. And the words are given in verse 30, throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The warning is, if he gives you his truth, use his truth. Be faithful. And so we have 3 parables, each essentially saying the same thing. Now, following those 3 parables, Matthew 25, verse 31, but when the Son of Man comes in his glory, we're back to prophecy now. And we already saw the Son of Man coming, so this is just picking up where we left off back in Matthew 24:31. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. So he comes and he is enthroned. Verse 32. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them from one another, as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, and he will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Judgment that is subsequently described, where he says to those on his right, come you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, you clothed me. Sick, and you visited me. A prisoner, and you came to me. And the righteous, those on his right, say, when did we ever see you, Lord? And he says, it's as if you did it to me when you did it to one of these little ones of mine. And then conversely, he says to those on his left, to the goats, you're cursed, and you go into eternal fire, which has been prepared for the devil and his angels, because, same reasons, I was hungry, and this time you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, you didn't invite me in. I was naked, you didn't clothe me. I was sick, in prison, you didn't visit me. They said, Lord, when did we see you? And again he says, it's as if however you treated these little ones of mine, that's how you treated me. And he concludes, and he says, these will go into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. So we have a final judgment. So that Matthew 24, verse 29 starts off, they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. Here in Matthew 25:31, he picks up that same thread when the Son of Man comes in his glory. In Matthew 24, verse 31, he had said, he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet. They will gather together his chosen, his elect from the 4 winds. And now all the nations are gathered before him, but they are gathered for judgment, either to eternal life or to eternal death. This last great judgment. And the question that we have is, will you stand in that judgment? Today is the day of preparation for that. Today is the day of faithfulness. Turn to the Lord. Trust in him as your Lord, as your Savior.